Royal Mile in Edinburgh. Place flooded with tourist stories and mysteries. But among the legends, one story is often overlooked. The story of Freemasons and craftsmen who built this city one stone at a time. So join me throughout the journey of Edinburgh Freemasons and explore the history of the Masonic Royal Mile. You know, many Masonic lodges in Edinburgh do a lot for the local communities. One of them is Lodge Journeymen Mason on 63 Blackfriars Street. They are organizing the breakfast morning for everybody every first Monday of the month. Feel free to join.
Shine on the one that's gone and made me blue. But it was on one moonlight night, stars shining bright, whisper on high, love said goodbye. I said, blue moon of Kentucky, just keep on shining. Shine on the one that's gone and made me blue.
Hi, I'm Cammy Goodal. I'm the immediate past master of the Lodge of Journeymen Masons, number 8 in the roll of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. I'm a tour guide in Edinburgh, as it happens. That's the majority of my work.
Okay, Brother Cameron, where we are now?
We are at the top of Johnston Terrace, just outside of the door of Lodge Roman Eagle, Romana Hiya, number 160, or CLX in Roman lettering, as they tend to be named, because originally they had their meetings in Latin, some in Greek, and indeed I think there were moves to do a few in Hebrew, but it didn't last very long. I think they only really did their meetings in Latin for about 12 years or so. And of course Roman Eagle sits right next to Victoria Regalia, which is a place that's known to almost every Freemason in Scotland, I would imagine, because it's one of the foremost suppliers of Freemasonic regalia and memorabilia.
Well, to the topic of Victoria Regalia, downstairs they have a huge workshop that is sewing aprons for the world of
Indeedly.
So that's like a true craftsmanship down in the middle of the old town.
Originally it was a lodge mainly for academics, for people who were Latin masters, Greek masters and that sort of thing, a lot of teachers from high school. And so it was seen for many years as being something of a society lodge and a place of learning, a seat of learning. But that's really broken down of recent days. It has a very wide membership, and I would say of all the lodges in Edinburgh, it's probably one of the 2 lodges that I would think of naturally if I were coming from somewhere where English is not necessarily your first language. There's quite a good number of individuals who come from disparate parts of the...
Very diverse.
Very diverse lodge.
And one of the few lodges that I noticed in Edinburgh that usually have a Quran, Bible and Hindu text next to each other,
right,
is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it is. So they usually have 3 volumes of the Sacred Law out on the dais, and they're certainly open to adding more to them if there are incoming brethren for whom neither the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or whatever suits them. There's one lodge in Edinburgh that's particularly well suited for people who belong to the Jewish faith, Lodge Solomon. So possibly if I was coming from a Jewish tradition, I would want to push people probably towards Lodge Solomon, because that's the one that probably most closely kind of knits with your community and what have you. But if you're coming from another faith perspective or whatever, CLX is certainly one of the lodges that I would naturally think of, and probably St David's University Lodge is the other, number 36. It's a good lodge. It's a vibrant lodge. A reasonably good spread of ages in here. Some of the lodges are very elderly, getting in perspective, but that's not true of CLX. It's quite a...
CLX is very young lodge.
Yeah. It's vibrant. It's it has a good social program as well. CLX at the moment.
If you can answer to our viewers one question, what is Freemasonry?
Well, I mean, to me, Freemasonry is it's specifically it's a system of morality. It's It's difficult to put it into words exactly what Freemasonry does for you. You know, it's not really about that for me, but it's about framing to you probably values that you already cherish and values that you already hold deep, but just to make you think a little bit more deeply about them and about why you should be, kind and helpful, and give you a framework for that and make it easy for you to be able to achieve goals which align with these core principles of fairness, of integrity, of honesty, and of friendship and brotherhood. If you need something done within your community, absolutely go and chap up your local Freemasons lodge, because they're probably motivated to help you.
Is there any specific lesson for your life you learned from being a Freemason?
Certainly one of the things that it's done for me, I'm quite open to the idea of being someone, who will speak in public. And I think a lot of that comes down to visiting Freemasonic lodges as a young man. I was in the army for 30 years there or thereabouts, and very frequently when we would travel about with the regiment, there were a number of us who were happy to identify as being Freemasons. Whenever we'd get to a new place, we'd go and obviously introduce ourselves to that local Masonic lodge, whoever they might be. Very frequently, because I was the newest Freemason, I would be the one who would take a test to prove that I was a Freemason, because all of that information was freshest in my mind in comparison to some of the other guys. And naturally, having been the person that they talked to when they first come into the building, if someone wanted a speech said at the end of the meeting or in the dinner or whatever, naturally it would be me, because I'm the person that they first spoke to, and so this sort of really improved my credence, and it improved my fluidity. It improved everything, and I've never really had a fear of speaking in public ever since.
I still have it, and slowly getting there, but it's still there.
Yeah,
and Freemasonry is actually helping to that. Really.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. If I were looking for, one tangible benefit that Freemasonry gives you, that's a definite tangible benefit. Most of the rest of it is just about feel-good factor and about having a community and having friendship and what have you. You could find these things other places. There's no reason that you necessarily have to be a Freemason to have a circle of friends. Of course not. But what you will find in Freemasonry is that it's far more far-reaching than most other organisations, even big ones like Boy Scouting or the Rotary Club or something, which does have a worldwide reach. Freemason reach is bigger, and so it just gives you a much better opportunity when I was a young man and I was travelling down to England, or I was travelling across to Hong Kong, or I was across Northern Ireland, I could meet people that I knew that would be on the same wavelength as me, and almost immediately I am in with the community, and I meet all sorts of people who are not Freemasons as a result of this.
So like, share and subscribe.
Okay, so we've got 3 main degrees within St John's Freemasonry, and so when you enter as an apprentice, and you would be known as an entered apprentice after you've taken your first degree. And the tracing board is here, and you'll understand once you've become a Freemason, if you choose to do that, what the symbolism of all this is. But you've got the first degree in Freemasonry, but then you become a fellow of the craft, and again, a lot of symbolism in here. It's not something that I expect that you'll understand necessarily, even after you've heard it in open lodge for the first time. But the second degree is sometimes known as the fellow craft degree, sometimes known as the journeyman degree. That's much less common, but a journeyman is, just by repetition, a fellow craft. It's a synonymous term. But after a certain period of time, you would then be raised to what we call the high and sublime degree of a master mason. You shouldn't worry that this looks a little bit macabre. It's not as dark as it seems, but certainly this is where your lessons in Freemasonry sort of culminate.
So, Brother Kami, what is our next stop?
Well, I think we'll wend our way down the Royal Mile, and I would like to stop off at the Lady Stairs Close. So just on the way, before we stop off at the Writers' Museum, I just want to show you quickly inside this close here, because Robert Milne and John Milne are both past masters of the Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel. And in actual fact, John Milne was the main builder. The extension work, which was done to the Palace of Holyrood House in the 1680s, during the reign of King Charles II. And they were the masters of the craft in Scotland as far as stonemasonry is concerned, both members of Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel. And this is where they had their residence, right here.
Brother, come in where we are.
We're just outside of the Writers' Museum here. Commemorates 3 of our great writers in Edinburgh, but it's right inside Makars Court here, and you can see inscriptions all over the floor here to many, many great writers in Scotland and in Edinburgh. But the 3 main ones that we try to venerate in the Writers' Museum are Brother Robert Burns, Brother Walter Scott, and Robert Louis Stevenson, who, as far as we know, probably was not a Freemason, but certainly Sir Walter Scott was a member of St David's Lodge number 36.
You know, for me, as an Eastern European person, I always wondered why Rabbi Burns is so much, venerated in Scotland, why people loved him so much.
I mean, he's certainly not just venerated in Scotland. That's one of the remarkable things about Robert Burns. He's venerated all over the planet because he had an amazing vision of what humanity ought to find capable and the way we ought to live our lives. And a lot of his ethos and what have you is firmly espoused within Scottish Freemasonry, for sure. And it's, Robert Burns is someone that we hold very, very dear to our heart. And every lodge in Scotland, I think, that I've ever been in has had a
with a
picture of Robert Burns in it. He's someone that we absolutely cherish because he was a very active Freemason. The same couldn't really be said of Sir Walter Scott. He came to Freemasonry quite late in his life, and I would actually make the point that I think that Robert Burns became the hero that he was and the figure that he was and the renowned character that he was in Scotland and worldwide, in large part down to the fact that he engaged in Freemasonry as a young man. That gave him mobility, and it gave him credence, and it gave him visibility.
So apparently what you told me, we are looking to the place where Robert Burns have been living.
That's right, in Upper Baxter's Close. So where we're standing just now, where we're looking over here, Dominic, that is where Upper Baxter's Close would have been. And when he came to Edinburgh, he was looking for a place to live, and a natural place for him was to share a bed. That seems a bit kind of odd to us in the 21st century, but it was
normal for there.
Very normal in that period of time.
Edinburgh was so overcrowded in those times. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And so he shared the bed with a friend who he knew from his Mauchline days, and moved in there with him, and he spent about his first 8 months in Edinburgh in there. And then obviously after that, his second volume of poetry, the Edinburgh edition, that was published here in Edinburgh. And the funds which were released to him as a result of this meant that he could take other lodgings eventually. But first of all, he went and saw a bit of the world, because young man, money in his pocket for the first time, he wanted to see the place. And so he went on a tour of the Borders, he went on a tour of the Highlands, and he wanted to see what more Scotland had to offer. This is a painting which represents a recollection which Sir Walter Scott had in later life of meeting Robert Burns at the Lending Library in Parliament Square. And you see the poet here, a very young Sir Walter Scott looking with great wonder on this wonder of the age.
Can be said that the Rabbi Burns was a great inspiration for Sir Walter Scott?
Oh, 100%, and Sir Walter Scott would tell you that in his own words. And he said later on in life, he said that, he never saw such an eye in a human being, and he had seen the greatest men of his age. Sir Walter Scott said that the eyes in Robert Burns's head were black and yet burned with an intensity that he'd never seen in any other human head. Some other greats in here, we have Dr. Adam Ferguson here, we've got Miss Eliza Burnett, Davy Sibbald, it's his lending library right here. This is Abyssinia Bruce here, David Allen, Alexander Naismith, the man who painted the very famous portrait of Robert Burns along with Henry Mackenzie, the man of feeling, and Dr. Hugh Blair, who was the minister at St Giles, that you can just see out of the open door there. That's St Giles Cathedral there, because this is right in the corner of Parliament Square. This is Riddle's court here. There's a lot of interesting stuff to show you in here, not least of all the fact that the man who invented the dollar sign, as we presently know it, was born in this building right across here. Patrick Geddes, the most famous town planner of the late 19th century, had a lot of his workshop right here in Riddle's court. It's named for the same family, the Riddles, for him who cannot be named, Lord Voldemort, takes his name from. Thomas Riddle. You'll find his gravestone down in Greyfriars. Don't go looking for it though. There are plenty of people doing that. It gets awful traversed and introduced. But the person I really want to talk to you about is a fella called Baillie James McMorrin, who was one of the most important bailies of the town during the reign of King James VI of Scots. And King James, when he returned back from Denmark with his bride, or I should say returned back from Norway with his bride. She was Danish, but he actually went to Norway to pick her up. And they came back here and they were feasted by Baillie James McMorrin, because he was the goldsmith of note at that time in Edinburgh. He was the Deacon of the goldsmiths of Edinburgh and by far the most influential individual in town. That's why the building is the colour that it is, because in Scotland you're not allowed to paint your building the king's gold unless the king has spent a night under your roof. While he was here, they had a whistle competition. And Robert Burns writes a wonderful poem, or in actual fact a song, called The Whistle. You can check it out. It's a drinking contest. It's well worth a look at. But Baillie James McMorrin lost his life in very strange circumstances, because he was shot through the window by a schoolboy during the Great Barring Out. One of the things that we don't really talk about the Reformation of Scotland is that a lot of school children lost a great many school holidays as a result of all the Saints' Days being done away with. And one of these children got a little bit too boisterous, and he had a firearm, and they were shouting insults at all the men down in the street. And the young boy appears to have shot a wild shot out of the window and killed Baillie James McMorrin dead as a result of it. And he got off with the shooting, even with the manslaughter, because he was a St Clair of Rosslyn. So there you are. So you've got to take the good with the bad, I guess. And William Brodie here, unfortunately, was a member of Lodge Canongate Kilwinning, number 2. He was also the Deacon of Rights of Edinburgh. He was a cabinet maker to trade, and a very good cabinet maker. But he was also a gambler and a womaniser. Not particularly good at either of these two things, and so he turned to a life of crime. And his workshops were just in here. Then later on, owned by Celtic Lodge, number 291. Come on through the close. Filming. This first floor up here, the one with the big windows here, this was used as the workshop for William Brodie, as a cabinet maker. And as I say, it became the Harmony Hall for Celtic Lodge number 291. And their meeting hall was up above the smaller windows that you saw up above there. A meeting hall was completely decked out in tartan, because the Celtic Lodge, as the name suggests, very much in contact with their Celtic roots, their Celtic roots. Nowadays we tend to think of that as being something particularly Irish, but it's equally true of the West Highlands of Scotland, and so everything was bedecked in Royal Stewart tartan. All their seats, everything, even their deacon's wands were in Royal Stewart tartan. It's quite garish.
So tell me the story of St Giles Cathedral and Freemasonry.
Well, St Giles here has been the parish church of Edinburgh since the 1100s, during the reign of King David I. It first became the parish church of Edinburgh, and obviously it's expanded a great deal over the time. But certainly Edinburgh Masons We can prove their existence here. We have town records explaining just how long they're going to work on the building. All of this that we can see here was almost entirely carried out by members of the Lodge of Journeymen Masons, number 8. We were thoroughly involved with the building of the outside skin that you can see here. We have records telling you all about that. But the open crown spire that you see rising up over the top of it, that's an older part of the building. That dates back to the 1500s. And again, this would have been the Lodge of Edinburgh at that time. And we can tell from parish records just how many hours they were supposed to work in the summer and in the winter, and what they would be accorded for this. Freemasonry grows out very much out of craft stone masonry in Edinburgh specifically, because with the Reformation, stonemasons are worried that their work is going to be undervalued, so they start to bring gentlemen into their club, if you like, into their guild, in order to. It's essentially a marketing ploy. They're saying we're probably not going to be building terribly many great places of worship, so instead, why don't we tell you about what we do, and then maybe we can build you a nice house. And it really does work. And the modern concept of an architect really comes from this period. People like Robert Milne, people like John Milne move out of the building trade and into the architecture trade. But then equally, you've got individuals who have nothing really to do with the stonemasonry, just getting involved in architecture. And,
So basically, this city can actually thank to Lodge Journeyman Mason to build it up from ground up?
Almost, yeah, almost. Certainly, well into the start of the 20th century, still a very large number of the members of the Lodge of Journeymen Masons involved in the building trade. It's significantly less the case now. Really, from the First World War onwards, we started to lose a lot of that in our DNA, and people just came from any craft. But it was a natural place to come to if you were a builder. So the incorporation of Mary's Chapel briefly met in Burnett's Close here, 18th century. Before moving down into Hull Street, just at the end of the end of the 19th century. The original Mary's Chapel I'll show you just in a moment. So this is the location, Dominic, of the original Mary's Chapel, or St Mary's Chapel, as it certainly would have been back in the day, because it is a pre-Reformation building, and it was venerated to St Mary the Virgin, the Mother of Christ, and obviously post-Reformation, something that you really can't talk about. There was no longer any veneration of Mary as being in any way different to a normal human being. She was just profane like anyone else, and therefore the Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel, very much do not like having a saint interpolated into their name at any place. But certainly it would have been St Mary's Chapel back in the day, and the incorporation of builders and rights came together to form the United Incorporation of St Mary's Chapel, being that they were both driving towards the same thing. They were both involved in the construction trade and everything to do with domestic building and fitting. So it was natural for them to be together.
I still can't imagine how this place looked like in those times before they demolished it for the building of the North Bridge, basically.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, well, the South Bridge is quite a remarkable structure in many ways, and again, designed by a member of Journeymen Masons, number 8.
Tell me the significance of St Cecilia Hall, because it was not the St Cecilia Hall all the time.
Not all the time, no.
In the top of it, you can still see the Freemason Hall.
Exactly, so we can walk down and take a look at that if you like. But St Cecilia's Hall was begun as being a concert venue. It's now back to being a concert venue as well as being a museum of musical artifacts. Well worth a look inside. Completely free to enter. It's not open every day of the week, but it's open most of the week. I think it's closed on a Monday. There you go. How typical. But no, it's very worthwhile going and taking a look around St Cecilia's Hall. It's got wonderful acoustics, and you're absolutely right. After it stopped being the main music venue and that got moved down to Shakespeare Square, at that point in time, it then became Freemasons Hall, and it was the original location of the Grand Lodge of Scotland when it first got its get-go, because exactly of where it is, right next to Mary's Chapel, in very close proximity to Blackfriars Street, where Journeymen Masons have their premises. Absolutely integral to the old town.
I hope you are so far enjoying a video showing you the Masonic history of the Royal Mile. If you like the video, I will really appreciate if you can share it with your friends, like it, subscribe, or leave me a comment. Also, please feel free to ask any questions you have about Freemasonry. So, Brother Kami, where we are now?
Welcome in the home of Journeymen Masons, number 8, on the roll of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, which is a unique lodge in many, many ways. Of course, every lodge in Scotland is unique. It's one of the remarkable things about Scottish Freemasonry that every lodge has its own unique DNA. But I think number 8 probably has more claims of uniqueness than most. Not just because of its age, because it is quite an old lodge. We say that we were instituted in 1707. We don't really have any written proof to support this, particularly because unfortunately we had a bit of a contretemps with the Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel at that time, and they took all our books away from us and they weren't returned to us. And we have a minute book which dates back to 1723, but it records minutes in remembrance from 1707, 1708, because that's when we started to take up a subscription model. You know, as we discussed a little earlier on, we started to bring gentlemen into the craft, you know, as a marketing ploy. But things came to a head really for the journeyman. That comes from the French journeyman. So it's it's a man who's paid a day rate. But it's also a bit of a double entendre because a journeyman is free to travel with his work. You know,
I met actually the German journeyman traveling guy who is dressed in the traditional attire.
Right.
They are not allowed to have a phone. They are not allowed to have any money on them. Okay. And they just sleep and eat for the exchange for their work. And there's very skilled craftsmen with the metallurgy, with the wood, with everything.
Right.
And it's still tradition happening today.
See, our tradition was certainly different from that because certainly in Scotland, a journeyman was paid. An apprentice would not be paid. An apprentice, you know, as you'll know fine well, you know, they were supported by their employer traditionally with corn, wine and oil, whereas, a fellow of craft, a journeyman, they would be paid in the current coin of the realm, you know, the specie, whatever it was that they lived. And so the journeymen were the trained stonemasons within the incorporation of Mary's Chapel, but over the period of the 17th century, I guess, we were getting more and more gentlemen into the organisation, to the point where the journeymen are getting suspicious that money which was supposed to be put aside for periods of dearth, they feared that wouldn't be there anymore. Because, I mean, the building trades, they've always been susceptible to boom and bust. This is not a new thing. And of course, during the 17th century, although it was a period of a lot of feud and faction, there was also sort of like you see the birth of enlightenment in the mid 17th century. And so, you know, as you're getting to the end of the 17th century, people are saying possibly for the first time, you don't need to worry about bust because it's just going to be constant growth, just a constant trajectory of growth from here on out. So you don't need to worry about it. But this is what's, you know, it's something that we often hear from moneyed classes, and the journeymen are obviously suspicious about this. And so we start to take up a subscription on our own to protect against periods when we might have to deal with famine or whatever was going to be visited on us. As I say, things come to a head really in 1712, because at that time we've just decided we've had enough. We've asked repeatedly for the financial records of the Lodge of Edinburgh to be shown to us, and they're just prevaricating all the way down the line. They won't show them to us, and eventually we say, you know what, we've had enough, we're going to go our own way. We'll see you later. We wish you well. You carry on, but we're taking all the skilled labour with us. And all the journeymen, almost, there are 2 journeymen left in the Lodge of Mary's Chapel after the Lodge of Journeymen Masons leave en masse. And so obviously this leaves the employers a bit of a problem, because, you know, they've got all these plans for things to build, but they have no skill to build them. And so what they decide to do is to lock up the ringleaders of the journeymen. And one of them is a fellow called Andrew Brodie. and he's the guy that we choose to be our deacon. He's not to be confused with William Brodie. A couple of generations between Andrew Brodie and William Brodie. He's locked up in the toll booth, and the Lodge of Edinburgh are obviously hopeful that this is going to cause the Journeymen to just lay aside their dispute and come back into the fold, as it were. But it doesn't really work that way, because we have a mind of our own and a spirit of our own, and we refuse to be sidelined. And so eventually we managed to get these two guys freed, and rather than just sort of like bowing down, what we decide to do is to take our employers to court. And so we draw up something which we call our deeds of submission, and there's a copy of it hanging behind us here, and also a copy of the decrete arbitral, which is what the arbitrary body decided as a result of this, which was written in the obverse of the same sheet of paper. We still have it, but it's now pasted onto a piece of stout paper to prevent it from deteriorating. Yeah, exactly. So you can only actually read the one side of it. You can't read the other side of it. That's unfortunate. But we got it all sort of transcribed before it was pasted into the book, and that's why we have this hanging here. We were allowed and permitted to make masons on our own right. We were allowed to give the Mason's word, and Mary's Chapel did not accord with the findings of the arbitrary body, in spite of the fact that they'd said, we've jointly chosen these people along with the Journeyman Masons, but they didn't abide by the findings of it, and so we had to take out a second action, which resulted in this other document that you see hanging on the other side of the chair, the letters of warning, which were actually issued down from the Court of Session, the highest court in the land, again saying that the Lodge of Journeymen Masons had a legal right to make masons. Now, all of this predates the formation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. And the Lodge of Journeymen Masons is far from unique in being older than the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Many, many lodges in Scotland are. I think still around about 60 lodges which are in existence are older than the Grand Lodge of Scotland. But uniquely, we did not take a charter of confirmation from the Grand Lodge of Scotland when the Grand Lodge of Scotland got its get-go, because we didn't need one. And I think that we are the only lodge, I know that we are the only lodge in Scotland, but we may be the only lodge on the face of the planet who can claim to have a legal right enshrined in the law of the land that it can make masons. That's what the Lodge of Journeymen Masons can claim.
There is one tidbit of history I want to discuss with you, my brother.
Uh-huh.
I have a lot of audience from America.
Yes.
And many of American people will be very interested in the fact that members of this lodge built a lighthouse.
That's indeed the case. Because of the fact that we didn't hold a charter from the Grand Lodge of Scotland, there was a tendency sometimes for us to, operate slightly out with the realms of propriety when it came to things like. You need to remember that when the White House was built, the UK and the US were not necessarily in particularly fraternal accord with one another. But there was a dearth in building at that time in Edinburgh because of the wars which were going on against France. There wasn't a lot of money around, and as we discussed earlier, boom and bust, and you've got some individuals and they're saying, well, we need work, and someone comes up with a really great contract, to cross the Atlantic and build this really nice fancy house for George Washington, who, lots of people in Scotland had a great deal of sympathy for the Colombians at this stage, and they certainly felt as if the whole world should be moving in that direction. Robert Burns is a great example of that. Great fan of George Washington.
Names of those two brothers who built the White House?
Six brothers, yeah. But two of them in particular are John Williamson and James Williamson. Those two, I have their names in the top of my head. But there are another four that I know of, and I know their names, and I could find them in the Mark book, but not just at the moment, because I can't hold it all up in my head at the same time. But John Williamson and James Williamson, I can tell you for sure, were building a house across on the west end of Queen Street, when they got the call to go across and put up a structure at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
And my last stop today is Lodge Canongate, Kilwinning number 2, the oldest purposely built Masonic temple in the world. And my last stop is Chapel of St. John, so behind these doors is brothers Charles Stewart waiting for me with a tour of this beautiful historical lodge.
Hello, I'm Charles Stewart. I'm a past master of Lodge Canongate, Kilwinning number 2, who meet in this very room. Lodge Canongate, Kilwinning was formed in 1677 when it had a charter granted by Mother Kilwinning in Ayrshire. The Masons of the Canongate were desirous of having a Masonic lodge in the Canongate, and they requested Mother Kilwinning to grant a charter. And that was duly given, and it was dated in 20th of December 1677. Our history for a period after that is somewhat lost in time, and it's open to discussions how that came to be lost. But in 1735 we had got our act together and have got a complete set of records from there on to this day. In 1735 we had purchased the building adjacent to here, which was the home of Bailey Jack and his wife, and that gave us the ground here to build the lodge, which makes it the oldest purpose-built lodge room in the world. The mural behind me here dates back to 1977, so it's got a modern addition to the room. It was painted in memory of Alec Buchan, who was a past secretary of this lodge and past master, and he was also past Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Scotland and of the Royal Order of Scotland, and it was the Royal Order of Scotland who commissioned the painting. And Alec Buchan is depicted at the right-hand end of the group on the right side there. It depicts King David speaking with his architect at the building of Holyrood Abbey, and takes its rise from the legend that King David had gone hunting on a feast day, the feast of the Holyrood, or the Holy Cross, and he'd gone out hunting against the advice of his courtiers. He went into the forest, his horse startled a deer, the deer startled the horse, the king was thrown to the ground and about to be gored by the deer when a Holyrood appeared and the deer ran off. The king's life was saved. In a dream that night, he dreamt that God had told him that he should build an abbey for his salvation. So hence we have the gable wall of Holyrood Abbey that you can still see to this day. And it has King David standing in the centre, speaking with his architect, and his architect might be saying, "Be careful what you're saying, my lord, is a Cowan here." The Cowan was an ordinary workman who had no great skills, and he's leaning over the top there to try and learn the words of the Masons so he could pass himself off as a Mason and get better pay and conditions. In the foreground, it shows the Master Mason with his fellow craft and his apprentice. It shows their working tools, their working plans. And arrayed around about the picture are people who were depictions of people who were involved with the lodge and members of that Scottish enlightenment. So the folks who thought there's a bit more to life, and they involved the sciences in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And it goes round to Burns leaning against a pillar, writing yet another poem, and then a group in the corner there with Lord Byron and Sir Walter Scott, who was, as we know, a prominent Freemason. The organ here dates back to the 1750s, and it is of a type that was manufactured by Johannes Netzler in London, and he had come up to the lodge to survey the the building before having it constructed. It was sent up by ship from London to Leith, then taken by horse and cart to the lodge here. And one legend goes that some of the panels, it was the original flat pack, some of the panels were too large to negotiate the winding staircase, which was access to this level at that time, and so they just knocked a hole in the wall to get the panels in. But it's of a type that Handel, Mozart and Haydn would have been familiar with in London. We have absolutely no proof to say that either of those three musicians played this organ they were in Edinburgh at any time. However, there were other Schnetzler organs in Edinburgh at that time, and to my knowledge there's only one remaining in St. Cecilia's Hall, just a few hundred yards away.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into Masonic history of Edinburgh's Royal Mile, I'd love to hear what part you liked most. Drop a comment below. Liking, sharing or subscribing costs nothing and helps uncover more hidden stories like these. Thanks for watching. See you next time.